Hi, I'm John DeDakis. I'm a writing coach, a manuscript editor, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. You're one to one with me, and I'm one to one with Ellen Butler. There she is. She's a writer of historical fiction that is spy related. So welcome, Ellen, and tell me a little bit more about how you got into this kind of writing, which is, I think, very hard. It's historical fiction, especially, but then to complicate it with spy stuff, because as far as I know, you're not a spy.
No, you're right. Thanks. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for having me on One to One, John. It's good
You're
seeing
welcome.
you. Good to be here. I began my first spy fiction, which was The Brass Compass, many years ago. The idea came to me, and initially, my character was going to be a nurse in World War II because I wanted her in certain places. And then I started digging deeper after I found out that my grandfather had been a cryptographer during World War II. And I just got very interested in the background of intelligence and that sort of thing. And luckily, I was living in the Washington, D.C. area. I have access to people and a lot of source work for spy information. I combed through many hours of the what used to be the CIA FOIA site, Freedom of Information Act site website during my first foray, which was the Brass Compass. And then in the second, the Operation Blackbird, which is what you have up there now. That's a more recent one that I put out last year. Um,
We'll
I
take a
got
look at the brass compass there.
that takes place during World War II.
Mhm.
And the Operation Blackbird is actually in 1952 during the Cold War. So we're no longer worried about Nazis. We're worried about communism, obviously. And I had stumbled across a very interesting story and information about a Soviet defector, a real Soviet defector. And that just sparked my imagination. And that's how Operation Blackbird came about.
So tell me more about the defector.
So the gentleman's name was Grigory Tokati, or Tokayev, which is another name that he went by. He was born in Ossetia, Russia, in 1909. He grew to become a Soviet rocketry scientist and politician. He was initially an avid pro-communist. However, he later became disillusioned and joined an opposition group that sought to remove Stalin from power. However, during World War II, he flew bombing raids over Stalingrad in American planes. That was part of the Lend-Lease program and rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. And then after the war, he was eventually sent to Berlin as a ranking member of the Soviet Control Commission. However, during his time in Berlin, he feared that his former life, when he was part of the anti-Stalin opposition group, would get found out. Supposedly, there was information or photos out there, and he felt that his life was becoming in danger. And so he made contact in West Berlin with an English intelligence, um, and eventually he defected, was able to defect along with his family. Now, we don't actually know what happened because it is still classified. And they have English, English intelligence has not declassified it. At one time, apparently, Toccati, many, many years later, wrote his story, I think his memoir, and they would not allow him to publish it. They hid him for quite a while because he did fear for his life even after he defected into West Berlin, and then they got him out. So that was in 1947,
Mhm.
before the wall went up, and also before even the interior East-West German wall went up. So it was just very interesting to find what little I could on him. And then I created my own characters and was just inspired to create a Soviet defector in 1952. And I was just looking at what it was like. What was East Berlin and West Berlin? What were they like? West Berlin had been given money and an influx from Western allies to rebuild, because we certainly bombed and did a lot of damage to Berlin during World War II. And so it was became a rebuilt, and it was doing well. And then the Soviets were very anti-improvement for the Germans. They did not want to see the Germans rise again, and so they very much enforced their communist ideals and oppressed the East Germans. And East Berlin took a long time to rebuild. So even while I'm writing in the story, I write about the fact that they come upon some still bombed out buildings that have not been rubble and things like that from World War II that were not, you know, picked up or had not been cleared out and rebuilt and that sort of thing.
I when I was in the army, I was stationed in Frankfurt and
Hmm.
was able to get into East Berlin,
Hmm.
and the contrast was stunning between what West Berlin was like and East Berlin. Did you do research over there?
So I've been to Germany twice, and I spoke with CIA gentleman who had been not during the 50s because he's not that old, but had been there in the 60s and 70s. And we just discussed, like you just said, the drastic difference between Cold War East and West Berlin. Whereas West Berlin became a thriving kind of Western industry, East Berlin was still stuck in, you know, industrial revolution time. The the buildings were very blocky and rather unattractive and gray, and even the lighting, I was told, was very different. And I think you could still see it from space at night. The lighting, you can see the divide from East and West Berlin because of the type of lighting they used. And also, the gentleman mentioned that because of the, I guess they used coal production to run East Berlin and East Germany too. And he said when it rained and when you were in there, the rain was gritty because this was falling out of the sky.
Well,
And I actually used that in the book at one point because it rains on my character, and I talk about the grit from the sky.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's why I think your writing is so good, is because you're able to capture that, for lack of a better word, granular details that you're able to sprinkle into your novel to
Right.
give it that sense of authenticity. And
Hmm.
and you put into practice what I often try to teach my students is you need to show, not just tell. You really need to make, the scene vivid so that the
Hmm.
reader is put into the scene, and you do that masterfully.
Thank you.
Um, you're welcome, and well, thank you from as a reader. Thank you. Uh, and so let's go back to
The
the
brass compass.
exactly, because that's World War II, and
Hmm.
so and this was your first foray into spy fiction, historical fiction. Um,
Right.
Talk about the research process for that.
So I actually did about 2 years of research before I really sat down and started writing it. I was starting to outline it and realized I needed to get more information so that when I put my spy in places, I studied troop movements. So I know where she is and where supposedly on these days where troop movement where the troops were and things like that, because I put her in as the Americans and the Allies are moving forward, I should say, towards Germany, and Germany is retreating, and so there's a lot of fluidity and fluctuation of those lines. And so I have her in these places, the feeling of what is going on in Germany. Luckily, I was very lucky actually. My parents had a neighbor who was German, half Jewish, who lived in Berlin, who ended up in one of Hitler's work camps, was able to escape, and then hid out in his father's apartment for the rest of the war and was in Berlin when the Russians arrived. And so I was very lucky to be able to interview this gentleman to find out a number of things about, what the German feeling was during different points in the war, what his feelings were, how he dealt with it. He gave me very interesting information and pieces, such as during the bombings and things like this, electricity and they might have water issues or where you were going to get food and that sort of thing. Like every day you woke up and you're like, okay, well, I'm still alive. Where am I going to get food? Where can I get water? What is functioning? And he said one of the most interesting things he said to me was the phones were always functioning. Like his father could call neighbors across, I mean, it's not like they had long distance, but locally the phones continued to function. And the one credit that he did give the Soviets when they arrived, um, initially they were shock troops and it was pretty horrifying. But when they did arrive, they put in new structure and got the infrastructure running again, like the trains and the electricity and the water. And so he did give them credit for that. Um, but
Yeah,
I
my
wish he
dad.
would let. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I honestly asked him if he would allow me to write his memoir, but he was not comfortable with that, which is very unfortunate because he has a fascinating story.
Yeah, and my dad's unit liberated the Nordhausen concentration camp, and he was present when they met up with the Russians on the Elbe River. And
Mm,
my dad was not impressed with the Russians. They were, I don't think he used the word brutish, but that's exactly the
mm,
takeaway that I got from his description of what they were like.
right.
Um, I'm going to take a risk here, Ellen, and I want to ask you if they're based on your research and where we are now politically in this country, do you see any parallels between what's going on in this country now and what
Hmm.
was going on in Nazi Germany in say 1933, 34, in the years leading up to World War II?
Yeah, it's I'll be honest, some of the things that I see are very disturbing. Some of the what I feel is language that is exclusive rather than inclusive, that there are people who feel that others are less than them, which is exactly some of the Nazi feeling, the rise of some of the rhetoric that I hear is appalling, especially because leading up to writing this book, I watched a number of disturbing documentaries, and sometimes I just had to turn it off because they were just so horrifying and true, and just can't believe that human beings would do this to other human beings. And certainly the backlash against immigrants in this country uh, was still is very disturbing to me. I when I lived, well, living in Northern Virginia, there is a huge population of immigrants, and just of diversity because we have so many people from different countries living there that work for the government or work for their embassies and that sort of thing. I was appalled when a friend of mine of Indian descent, who was an American though, because she was born and bred here, but her parents were of Indian descent, at a grocery store not long after, I mean, days after Trump was elected, was pulled into a parking space and was yelled at and told to go home from where you came. This isn't your country anymore.
Mm,
I just didn't even know. I wouldn't even know what to do with that. Was just shocked that people could behave that way or think that it was okay suddenly to behave that way. And I think that's what's more disturbing to me is how it became normalized. And that is when I was discussing with the gentleman from Germany who grew up in Berlin, is how these things that the Nazis did became normalized. Because I remember asking him one time, I was like, well, how did you as Germans feel when the Anschluss happened and you annexed another country? You annexed Austria, how would we feel if we annexed Canada or Mexico or something? And he said, oh, well, we were very proud of the fact that now they were German and we were all German together.
mhm.
and so that was just, that mindset that it's okay to take over someone else's country. I mean, could you imagine us trying to just annex Canada? Well, they all speak English. It's all okay. They're just like us. But,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
not our
but that was
country.
okay. But that what you're just talking about was the early days of Trump when he was elected. Um, now he's under indictment. Things are not looking good for him legally. Um, have we turned the corner? Are you seeing a lessening of that kind or an intensification of that attitude?
I think we're going to see it intensify again with the next presidential election. And let us not forget that Hitler spent time in prison
Oh
before he
my.
became,
Oh
yes,
my. That's
that's where he wrote Mein Kampf, remember?
that's right. That's right.
Let's
Oh
not
man.
forget that.
But I mean, are you really making the comparison that Trump is like Hitler?
I'm saying that there are concerning trends that I see that he brings out in this country with, you know, anti-immigration and, the hatefulness that he seems to bring out in this country and false narratives that are brought out, alternative facts. Um, so I see and you know, it's very concerning, even though Fox News lost, a multi-billion dollar
Yeah,
lawsuit and is still having
almost a
right,
trillion dollars, right?
right, and it's still there's
I don't
another
think they ever
lawsuit still going on.
I don't think they ever really reported the amount that they had to pay.
Oh, well, and did they pay it all, or are we still in, are they taking it back to court?
I don't
I mean,
know.
are they going to end up paying it? Because if they have to pay out that much, I would think they might go out of business. Because I does Fox have that much to pay out? I don't know.
I don't. Well, that's for another day.
Right.
I want to go back to the cover of your novel there, because it is so. d- t- Did you have anything to do with the cover? Was this your idea?
Yes.
What's being shown here?
So I worked with a I worked with a cover artist on the cover design, and we did a lot of searching to find cover art, and this is what we worked together to come up with.
And what are we seeing? What's happening here?
Well, actually, that is not a 1940s. The SS officer was not in the original photo. He's been photoshopped in. This was I think it was a early 50s photograph by, gosh, I don't have the book in front of me, but the um the woman who took it, it was a female woman, and the woman in it is a I guess one of her models at the time. And this is actually I believe it is a English train station where it was taken.
And
But
but the what you're trying to get across is what? What are you going for in terms of
well, so
uh,
the storyline is her cover gets blown and she's got to get out of Germany. Or she's got to get out of German hands into the Allies. And there is a point when she's got to take a train in order to make that happen. So, bypassing all the security and everything to get where she needs to go.
okay, okay. So, let's you've also, I mean, though you've written two, historical spy novels, but what you did, you started a while back doing well, talk about your, these are just regular novels or mystery novels, I guess, or mystery action.
You're right.
Talk about your series.
So the Karina Cardinal Mystery Series, Karina is a amateur sleuth. By day, she works on Capitol Hill, and I don't want to say by night because sometimes it's during the day, but let's say that she stumbles across or falls into these mysteries that she gets pulled into. And she has a lot of curiosity, not always enough patience. So sometimes she leaps before she looks and finds herself in the middle of a lot of shenanigans. Luckily, there are people that she has in her life that have her back. During a certain period of time in the series, she's dating an FBI cybercrimes agent. And there's also this security company called Silverthorne Security, and they have been very useful to Karina in helping her solve crimes. This is one of those security companies that you might find in the movies or that sort of thing. They do exist. They will be sent overseas with private companies that we have overseas to provide security. They are security specialists maybe here in the DC area for diplomats and that sort of thing. So they're very helpful to Karina when she gets into a pickle or a jam. And Isabella's painting is the first one. And if anyone has heard about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, which happened in 1990, two men broke into the museum and stole $500 million worth of art. And to this day, the art remains at large. And luckily, I was once again able to contact a source with now a retired FBI agent who worked in the art crimes division at the time that this happened, and who actually went undercover in hopes of recovering one of the pieces, but he was not able to. 13 items were stolen from the museum, and I was able to interview him for this. So my story starts with, everything's not been recovered until now, and my character stumbles across a painting that she shouldn't have in her fiance's father's home. So it makes things a little bit sticky.
Um, are you an expert in art? I mean, how did you decide to do this particular story?
So it's funny, I saw a documentary on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, and then I picked up and watched every documentary and every piece I could find. And I also have spoken with um, been able to speak with some uh, professors who teach art history and have also been used to determine if art is real, that sort of thing, maybe worked for an auction house. And so I've been able to interview a couple of folks like that as well to get some information about art. Now, you got to remember, my character is an amateur sleuth. She does not know that much about art. So we are going on what she knows.
Mhm.
Obviously, I have some experts that come in and help her because I also have an artifact forgery, that's Pharaoh's forgery. And I don't, so the one thing that my character, Karina Cardinal, does not do is leave a lot of dead bodies in her wake. Um, as a lot of amateur sleuths tend to, all these dead bodies we stumble upon. So she does have one murder mystery that's called Fatal Legislation, and that happens on Capitol Hill. And I do have to kill off a senator because, sometimes people have to die. Um, so she has a lot of different she's got this art heist story, she's got a Capitol Hill murder mystery story, she has a diamond theft story. Pharaoh's forgery is about an artifact forgery, and that's when she goes on vacation and trouble follows her on vacation.
Of course.
There's a kidnapping, she has to help find this woman. And let's see what else we have. And the fifth one, Swindler's Revenge, is about money laundering and baseball.
Uh-huh.
And then the most recent one, or the newest one, I should say, which is coming out next month, is called Spectral Revelations. And Karina's aunt has gone missing, and so she has to come down to Williamsburg and
Ah,
try and find her aunt, what's happening. There are also, her aunt works for a museum, and things have kind of, a couple of things have been gone missing. And did her aunt take them? Where is her aunt? And but it's also, there's a little bit of ghost story, because if you've ever been to Williamsburg, there are all these ghost tours, and supposedly
right.
there are plenty of ghosts in the area. So her aunt, who is renting one of the homes uh, in Colonial Williamsburg, because staff members who work for the foundation can rent and live in these homes if you want to. She has a ghost in the house who kind of freaks Karina out a number of times, but he's a helpful ghost because he's trying to help Karina solve the mystery. And
Now,
he's
of
a
course,
Civil War ghost.
Okay. A lot of stuff going on there. So writers are encouraged to write what they know. You worked on Capitol Hill and at a medical association in DC. So tell us about your background and how that plays into your writing.
Well, so Karina is an advocate or a lobbyist, you might want to call her, for um, healthcare. She's a healthcare lobbyist. I worked for a medical association, the uh, uh, American Academy of Physician Assistants. I think they've changed to physician associate now. Um,
Are you a lobbyist?
was I then? No, I actually worked in international affairs and leadership development there.
Okay.
But I did have to have work. One of our leadership development programs was when our leaders came in and went to Capitol Hill to do lobbying for the physician associate profession.
Okay.
And that was
So that's your Capitol Hill connection, or did you work
Mhm.
for a
I worked
senator
for
or a
Senator Pell's
congressperson?
office
Okay. Okay. What
for
did
a
you
very
do?
short period of time because it was in between when I was after I graduated with my undergraduate degree, and then I went on to do my graduate program. So it was a very short period of time. Basically,
What are your degrees in?
so my undergraduate degree is in political science, and my master's is in public administration and policy.
Okay. Ever thought
So,
about running for office?
I did
You
back
can
in the
declare
day.
now. You could declare
No,
right now. No? Okay.
I did back in the day. After doing some time on the Hill and working and seeing, um, let's just say that I became a little jaded. I do feel direct that people are like, our system is broken. Well, part of our system that's broken is the election process. I feel as though a lot of the right candidates cannot get past the primaries because they have to go to the far left or the far right. I consider myself a moderate. I think that we are not represented because we have such a degree of difference in order to just get past the primaries. So I feel that if anything's going to really change in this country, we need to change the election process in a number of different avenues, not just the primaries, but also um, a lot of where money and the capability of putting it towards elections and that sort of thing. Buying your
Oh,
candidate, basically.
exactly. A lot of the people who watch this and listen to this podcast are writers or wannabe writers.
Mm,
And so one of the things I really hope to be able to do is to help have my guests be able to provide advice and insights into their process. And you're both traditionally and indie published, basically self-published, I guess. So talk about those two avenues, because if the
mm,
way I look at it, if you've got a book or if you've got a story that you think should be a book, one way or the other, it can get out there because it is now so
mhm.
easy to have your book, your story made into a book. So talk about your process in terms of traditional versus indie.
Well, when I first started, I didn't feel comfortable enough to go indie published because I didn't know about the publishing industry. So I went the traditional route. I got an agent and we got contracts, and I had books placed with a small press, and then I've also still have some books placed with Simon and Schuster, a large press. And I reached a point. All right, so I decided to indie publish my World War II spy novel, which was The Brass Compass. And I did that because if anyone knows the time period, so it could take your agent months and months and months, or possibly years, to sell a book. I had a number of veterans and older folks who provided feedback and information for this book to be written, and it was going to be 2 3 years before the book would have been published. Who knows?
Mhm.
um, and because if you go, especially if you go for a traditional, it's 2 years from when your contract is to when they get it get it onto into people's hands. And
Right.
I thought, this generation was dying off And I really wanted to be able to give these people something, to thank them for the information, the source material that they provided me for this book. And so that was my first foray into that. And not only that, I was very lucky. I'd had 5 books previously traditionally published, and I was starting to build following and readership and making those connections and understanding. And I understood what it meant to put a good book out as far as editing, which vitally important. So I always hire and I've worked with a couple of different ones. Some I've really found my team to help me make it right. So we have, cover artists and editors. So I'm definitely against just throwing anything up there. You need to do your research. You need to know what you're doing. And I do
And
provide workshops on that.
well, and one thing that is true, whether it's traditional or indie, is you need to be the one doing most of the marketing, right?
Yeah. Well, right.
How's
So
that? How's that?
that's the other thing I learned, that it doesn't matter whether you're traditionally published or indie published. You, as an author, will be doing a lot of marketing on your own, and you'll be expected to do it nowadays. Obviously, if you're a New York Times bestseller, fill in the blank, you are going to get a lot more support from your publisher. But if you're just starting out and you need to get out there, you need to be visible, you need to be on social media, you need to be developing a newsletter following, you need to be developing a readership following in some manner. And so I had already started doing that. And I started in romance, and a lot of those romance writers luckily followed me into the Karina Cardinal and even into my historical fiction. Not all of them do both. Some of them do one or the other, and some of them probably left me, which is fine. Something
You
that
can't please everyone. You can't please
no,
everyone.
no, that's why there are variety of chocolates, and we have a lot of different genres out there, and people are going to read, what interests them. And I encourage people to read what interests them. And if my stuff doesn't interest you, I can guide you to someone who probably will interest you. If you're into sci-fi fantasy, I'm not your gal.
I've
So,
you and I've come across each other a lot over the years at writers'
mhm,
conferences.
mhm,
And so and we both make presentations of different types. I think our most recent thing was you moderated a panel that I was on at Austin Camacho's C3 Creatures, Crimes, and Creativity Conference. It was a panel on journalism, but you also do some standalone teaching as well. Talk
mhm.
about some of the subjects that you get into with your students.
So it depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to a general readership public, I have 2 presentations that I tend to provide. One is about women spies of World War II, of the OSS. I've provided that to a number of different organizations, at libraries, at museums, retirement communities, just all sorts of different places, because it is fascinating. And honestly, I get a lot of boomer generation who's fascinated with it because those were their parents.
Right.
And then I also provide, in relation to my Karina Cardinal mysteries, I provide a kind of one that's more fun, which is the top 10 art heists in history. And I've pulled some very entertaining, fun art heists. I talk about how what made the Mona Lisa famous was when she was stolen, because really she's a rather small painting. She's not like,
Hmm.
I know when you see it, you think it's this big, giant painting, but she's really not that huge. But the theft is what made her famous, right? Made this painting
Hmm.
so famous as it is. So I talk about that theft. I do talk about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft. I talk about a statue. It's like a 2-ton statue that literally they craned out of a garden.
Good grief.
I know. Oh, these are some great. Some of these would make great movies. The Ocean's 11 types of movies. You gotta wonder how some of them did this, and some of them were done before video cameras. I talk about actually one of the first thefts that happened after we closed down from COVID. I think that was a Netherlands theft. It was a smash and grab job, and the dude got away on a motorcycle. And literally was just tucking him under his arms to run out
Golly.
with his paintings. So yeah, I touch upon 10 art heists that some of the greatest ones in history. Just very fascinating.
Talk
And
about your
then,
writing. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. There's more.
oh, well, and then I was just going to say, as far as to writers, I provide a presentation that I call "You've Published Your Novel Now One," and I talk about the different avenues of publishing and getting published and what they mean and what you should expect from that. I have one on query letters, blurbs, and taglines, and help finding an agent. Um, so those are kind of the things that I present on.
Talk about your writing process. Are you a planner, a seat of the pantser, a plotzer, which is a little of both?
So I started out as a pantster, because I was writing in romance, and for me it was more building the characters, because I feel as a romance is very character driven, because the main plot line is the romance itself. And so, I always wanted to work on my characters and that sort of thing. And I knew kind of what my highlight would be and where I was heading to. And then I just headed into it to see where these characters would take us. And sometimes they took us in directions I was not expecting. But once I started writing in mystery, it was just far too difficult. It was just really becoming too difficult, because I'd get, 10, 15 chapters in, and I'd be like, oh, I got to plot a clue back here in chapter 2 or 3. And it was taking me way too long going back and forth. So I started becoming a plotter. And because you have to work it all out and make sure that, okay, well, I'm going to drop this, and whose motivation and what's everybody's motivation. Oh, I want to give this person a motivation to be the killer, or that sort of thing, so that it's all very questionable until we wrap things up.
Yeah. And so where do you go from here? What's next for you?
So, Spectral Revelations is the last. I've said that's number 6, and I'm saying it's the last Karina Cardinal. I never say never, but for the
Yeah.
time being, it is the last Karina Cardinal that I'll be working on. I am moving into a new character. Her name is going to be Ariadne Winters. She takes place in the 1950s. She goes to college, becomes a journalist, and wants to become an investigative reporter. And of course, in the 1950s, she's laughed out of the newsroom for this ideal. She ends up working for a fashion magazine and is sent on an assignment and stumbles across a dead body. So we have kind of a Knives Out, Glass Onion scenario, where everybody in the inn, because it's the innkeeper of the inn she's staying at for this assignment, kind of becomes everyone's got a motive for murder, let's say. And so she's going to unravel the story, to figure out, and then this will hopefully get her a little bit launched into possibly, making her go more towards the investigative journalism, which is what she wants to do, because she's very smart and serious. But
Where do you get your names?
um, so Ariadne came to me. It was a Greek name that I came across at some point, and I
Oh,
actually
that's
kind of make a
good.
joke in the book, saying, my Aunt Ruby once told me I was lucky that I didn't end up being Harmonia or Persephone, because my mom was going through this Greek phase, that I ended up with Ariadne. So that's where her character name comes from, because her mother was
Okay.
in a Greek phase. And there's a whole also storyline back and forth, because the mother does not want her becoming this. Her mother just wants her to get married. She grew up on Long Island, and her mother just is appalled that she's living in New York. I mean, she's living in this women's apartment, because back in the 50s there were these apartments for women, and so she is living in this, apartment for women. And but her mother, she has to go back out every other Sunday for Sunday dinner with her mother, where her mother will throw men at her, will always invite a man over also as well for Sunday dinner,
Oh
in
man.
hopes that her daughter will get married and settle down and do what she's supposed to do in the 1950s, rather
What
than
what
having
could
this
possibly
career.
go wrong? What could possibly So there's a lot of room for humor here, I would think too,
Yes.
right?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
So,
you seem to love the 1950s, and you have a passion for classic cars. especially the 1950s with the bright colors and the fins and the the headlights or the taillights. The taillights were very distinctive, and of course,
Mhm.
I loved the cars in the 50s because every year they looked different. I mean, I can
Right.
tell the difference between a 1956 Chevy and a 1957 Chevy.
Mhm.
I mean, they just were different. So, what is it that attracted you to classic cars and especially 1950s?
Well, I grew up, I always liked, and it isn't just the 50s. I do like a lot of other different kinds of cars. I actually own a 2003 Thunderbird, which was the retro
Whoa.
bird, which looks a lot like the 1950s bird. I was interested and I was looking at the 1955, 56, 57. Those are my favorite Thunderbirds. And I was looking at buying one, but I really, at the time that I was buying it, I didn't know a good mechanic and was worried if
Yeah.
something broke down, I wouldn't know how to fix it. And I didn't know the cost that it would be to get it fixed or who I could get it, where I could get it fixed. So I ended up buying this 2003 Thunderbird because it was newer. I also will be honest, I like my air conditioning, which the older birds did not have. I wanted a convertible, and this was my little. I like to call it my midlife crisis car. So, and I take it to shows, car shows and cruise ins and that sort of thing, and really enjoy because I get to talk and chat with other folks who have these beautiful 1950s cars, like you said, the Chevy, oh, the Cadillac, that big old giant Cadillac, and
Oh, yeah.
um and they're all metal. That's the other thing. They're just, really made sturdy and hardy, and the fact that they still have a lot of them still have original engines or may have had newer engines that were from the 60s rather than the 50s or whatever they've done. They've souped them up. And so it's really interesting to talk with folks who've renovated these cars to keep them going and on the road. I think they're just really fun to look at and see and chat with people about. And the 60s have some, but I really love like the 50s Corvette as well. That's, oh, I would love to have a 50s
Well,
Corvette in my garage.
is any of this gonna work itself into your fiction?
Well, so Ariadne, her mother has a 1956 Thunderbird that she loaned because Ariadne's the story that she has to go and research and write about is going to be up in Newport, Rhode Island. So her mother just is appalled. You can't be on this dirty train and take these dirty buses, ignoring the fact that every day Ariadne takes, a rat infested subway train back and forth
Right.
in Manhattan, and loans her turquoise Thunderbird to go up so she can drive up to Newport, Rhode Island, and do this story, which she has to do, and ends up, stumbling over a dead body.
Well, I know a lot of people will want to get in touch with you, and the best way to do that is through your website,
Mhm.
ellenbutler.net, where there's
Right.
a portal so that they can send you an email,
Mhm.
maybe get you to come to talk to their group. And
Right.
is there anything else that I didn't ask that you'd like to get into?
John, I think we covered quite a bit of it. You went through a lot of my writing career that I didn't even realize we'd be covering.
Well, I mean, you're a fascinating person and you write really well. And I mean, and you've probably experienced this too. So many books, so little time.
Right.
So it's just not possible to read everything I'd want to. But I'm
Right.
sure that at least I'm hopeful that you're going to be able to, come across some other new fans based on this. So, thank
Mhm.
you. We've been talking with Ellen Butler. She's a mystery novelist, but also a writer of historical spy fiction. I'm John DeDakis. You've been one to one with me. Ellen, thank you. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.